The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
A warm welcome to Squawk Box this Wednesday morning. I'm Steve Sedgwick with Karen Cho and Charlotte Reid, of course, in Paris to cover French events. Right, these are your headlines. A incredible, volatile whirlwind 24 hours in South Korea. The president, Yoon Suk-yeol, is reportedly now facing an impeachment vote as soon as Friday. This after a brief period of martial law, triggering yet another political crisis in the country and sending the won to a 2-year low.
France's government teeters on the brink of collapse after opposition parties tables a no-confidence vote against the Prime Minister's handling on the budget.
The S&P 500 and Nasdaq notch new record highs while investors await Friday's jobs report for clues on the Fed's next move. And Amazon Web Services unveils plans for new AI supercomputer powered by homegrown chips as it battles chip-making giant NVIDIA.
If you look at AI, it's not really an NVIDIA versus us. NVIDIA is a fantastic partner of ours and will be for a really long time. But we think that the industry is going to benefit from choice.
Right, extraordinary events globally, a lot of them, of course, known. Concerns about what happens next in US-China tensions, concern about what happens in Europe with politics, plus a whole host of other political issues. But one that we weren't expecting was from South Korea. The president, Yoon Suk-yeol, is reportedly now set to face impeachment proceedings on Friday, according to an opposition lawmaker, after seeing his martial law order overturned by Parliament just hours after imposing it. Now, Yoon made an unexpected televised address late Tuesday night announcing martial law in the face of what he claimed were threats from North Korea and anti-state forces, although he did not cite any specific risks. He then rescinded the order 6 hours later in another television address after Parliament voted to overturn it. Well, the Bank of Korea has pledged to deploy measures to stabilize the FX market, whilst also promising to boost short-term liquidity as needed. The BOK issued a statement after an emergency meeting today. Quick look at the South Korean won and where that has been trading versus the greenback. And one thing you'll notice is, yes, there is some movement. Yes, the dollar, of course, has rallied, but you'll notice it's fairly moderate reaction. And those of us that lived through the East Asia crisis will recall that this is nothing compared to the kind of moves we've seen at the height of other crises, both political and financial markets as well. Let's take a look at some of the big heavyweights in the Kospi itself, down 1.4%, 2% year to date. But again, this is my point, and obviously that's a chart showing a longer term period. But again, despite the ramifications of a huge seismic set of political events, I think the reactions have been very tempered. Hyundai Motor down 1.9%, POSCO down 0.9%. Well, speaking today, the floor leader of the opposition Democratic Party called for Yoon to go.
Yoon Suk-yeol is not in his right mind. His judgment and situational awareness are not normal. It has been confirmed that he is in such a seriously abnormal state that he should not be performing his duties as president, even for a single minute or second.
Well, we've got some expert analysis now. Jeremy Chan is Senior Analyst, China and Northeast Asia at Eurasia Group. Jeremy, thank you very much indeed for getting on a Zoom call or whatever it is and to talk to us today as well. Look, before we talk about the extraordinary events of not even the last 24 hours, the last 15 hours or so, just explain to us the backdrop here and what's going on and how frustrated the president has been and why he's a lame duck and just what the build-up to this is.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Appreciate the question. It's a good one. The background here is that Yoon, since he came into office in 2022, has faced divided government. The National Assembly has remained under opposition control. It was strengthened in an election that took place in April. And since that point, the opposition party has been increasingly personalizing its politics and spending a lot of its time pursuing investigations or attempting investigations against his wife, bringing articles of impeachment against members of his his inner circle, and basically trying to sort of, cave in and encroach upon Yoon's ability to operate domestically and essentially render him a lame duck only halfway through his presidential term.
The actions of the opposition, they are opposition actions that we've seen, dare I say, in Washington, D.C. We've seen it all over the world, that doesn't make them pro-North Korea sympathisers. And I think this is the side of the story that a lot of people just want clarity on, if it is possible, Jeremy, that actually with North Korea as perhaps the most dangerous neighbour on the planet that any country could have as well. Just give us that side of the equation as well. Is this just politicians being politicians, or is there something more serious going on, as the president initially insinuated?
So I think the North Korea element is a red herring. If you read Yoon's statement in his initial address to the public, he's focusing on the National Assembly, the legislators that are standing in the way of his essentially ability to govern. He tars them with the brush of being, pro North Korea, anti-state sympathizers, but that's really just rhetoric to sort of reinforce the message, which is that what they're doing is undermining his ability to govern.
Jeremy, South Korea has used martial law before, but not really in recent memory, many decades ago. In this context, when you've got a huge US military base also positioned in South Korea, what are the optics and what sort of messages is South Korea sending to the international community here?
Optics are not great. With that said, I don't think that the effort by Yoon had a particularly external locus. I think it was directed almost entirely domestically. You saw in the response from Washington, it was quite measured. Not pleasant or not pleased language out of Washington, and relief when the martial law announcement was lifted 6 hours later. But with that said, we do believe that the capitals of Washington and Tokyo are probably looking on with great unease, not only at the initial announcement of martial law, but the further steps and sort of outcomes yet to come, which probably results in Yoon's early resignation from office, if not removal through impeachment, and probably the election a few months hence of a very different figure in Mr. Lee Jae-myung, the leader of the opposition party.
Jeremy, I think it's fair to say there's a lot of sensitivity about the fortunes of democracies at this stage, and seeing troops on the ground, martial law declared, it did have a very negative connotation for democracies. What type of fallout do you expect for South Korea and beyond because of this event where, if brute force has been deployed when perhaps there could have been a democratic process involved here? This seemed like a last resort by a president where perhaps he shouldn't have pulled that trigger.
Absolutely. I think there will be history books written about what exactly motivated Yoon to make this decision. I think it's generously described as an act of desperation. More people describe it, I think, as an act of political suicide. That is, if it was intended to forestall the impeachment or his removal from office, it, if anything, backfired and is likely to accelerate that process. I think that he's a dead man walking and is likely gone within weeks, and potentially could be facing imprisonment for himself, for his wife, and members of his inner circle.
Jeremy, what jumps out to me was the market reaction too, and typically currencies is where some of the fear can be expressed, but fairly modest reaction. But behind the scenes, two people, and I've spoken to both of them this year, and this is the finance minister and the central bank governor, and both very capable players here that had already been very active in the market because of the strength in the US dollar as we progress throughout 2024. So in some ways, to me, it felt as though they're ready to react to currency moves. It just perhaps happened in a different connotation to what they've been dealing with this year. What do you make of the ability for major movers like the finance ministry and the central bank to step in to address wild moves in the currency?
I think that the bureaucracy in South Korea is world class. I think that they have ample resources and ample ability to address whatever sort of fiscal or monetary headwinds come their way. I think some of the weakening of the currency can be attributed to the surprise rate cut that the Bank of Korea undertook last week. But more broadly, I think that the sell-off was actually relatively muted. I think it was like a 1 or 1.5 sigma move, which is not particularly notable in the grand scheme of things. With that said, I would advise investors to be looking at the longer term picture, not just the rescinding of the martial law declaration, but what this heralds over the next weeks and couple months to come for the political system in South Korea.
Yeah, and I was interested when you said about the very tempered reaction from Tokyo and from DC as well, Jeremy, because you will know far better than I do, and I'm just an amateur student of this as well, that there are very difficult relations for South Korea with one of its key allies, Japan, as well. And that goes way back to since the Second World War as well. Plus the pivotal position that South Korea played in the 50s and 60s in the US defense of democracy as well. So it has a very complicated and important position in the alliance against China, quite frankly, or against the Soviet Union as well. And the Chinese reaction, I'm sure, will be very interesting as well. Jeremy, just put this into the wider geopolitical context and what it could mean going forward.
So, I mean, if you zoom out for a second, President Yoon, who has been a lame duck and ineffective domestically, has had a far larger imprint on South Korea's foreign policy because he doesn't need National Assembly approval to act externally. And he's overseen a dramatic realignment of South Korea's foreign policy, returning Washington to the center of Seoul's foreign policy, dramatically improving relations with Tokyo, distancing Seoul from Beijing, and taking a very hawkish line towards Pyongyang. So the prospect of Yoon, who has been this transformational foreign policy figure, stepping down and likely being replaced by somebody who views the world very differently, and the opposition leader Lee Jae-myung, you could see a dramatic reversal of almost all of that progress. So this is a very bearish signal going forward for bilateral cooperation with Tokyo, trilateral cooperation with Tokyo and Washington, and is probably being cheered quietly for the moment, but cheered nonetheless in Pyongyang and Beijing.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Unfortunately, you've reaffirmed my concerns. Jeremy, I know it's an ungodly hour in DC, so I really appreciate you joining us. So thank you so much for giving us your expert analysis. Jeremy Chan, Senior Analyst, China and Northeast Asia at Eurasia Group. And for more on the market fallout, or in my opinion, actually lack of market fallout, I think it's been incredibly stable compared to what it could have been from this story in South Korea. Check out CNBC.com. Karen.
And coming up on the show, France counts down to a crucial no-confidence vote to Michel Barnier's government. We'll be live in Paris throughout today's show. Plus, Fed policymakers weigh in on the rate outlook as US job openings come in ahead of expectations. And we'll discuss the crypto space and how blockchain technology could influence the uranium market with Tezos co-founder Kathleen Brightman. That conversation is coming up at 8:15 London time. French Prime Minister Michel Barnier has rejected the idea that President Emmanuel Macron should resign amid a political crisis in the country. Barnier, who faces a no-confidence vote in Parliament today, told French media he believes MPs will act responsibly and will express their support for the government and its spending plans. A look at how we're shaping up on yields this morning. You can see at the short end, the 2-year, we're trading 2.16%. So a slight lift there also at the 10-year, perched around 2.90. Let's get out to Charlotte for more. Charlotte, a lot of analysis and critics looking at the situation and saying, well, it's Barnier today, it could be Macron next. Just flesh out where we stand.
Well, certainly it could be the final hours of the Barnier government. The Parliament will debate their vote of no confidence from 4 p.m. Paris time, and then at the end they will vote for it. So it means that by dinner time, Michel Barnier's government might be toppled just barely 3 months into the job. And here again, big question of what happens next. You know, this Parliament remains the same until July next year, extremely fragmented, 3 blocks. They have to try to compromise and find concessions. That's what the Barnier government tried to do in designing the budget for 2025. Of course, they had to keep on board one of the 2 blocks. They were trying to appease the far-right group by giving some concessions that didn't bring some, but then the far-right decided that it was not enough. And so the far-right said they would support a vote of no confidence as well as the left, which means that if that happens, then tonight the government will be toppled. That means then President Macron would have to pick another prime minister. And the question is, who might that be? They saw that Michel Barnier, given his skills in negotiations, he was the Brexit negotiator there, he might be the right figure to try and balance everything, but it looks like maybe it wasn't the case. So speaking last night on television, Michel Barnier said that he hoped that his government could survive the vote later today?
Je le souhaite. C'est en effet possible. Ça dépend.
I hope so, and I think it's possible. It's up to MPs, each of them with a share of responsibility in front of the French people, the voters of their constituencies, and the whole of France, which finds itself at a pretty serious moment in time. I think it's possible that a reflex of responsibility arises, where, beyond political differences and diverging views, and all the normal conflicts within a democracy, there's a best interest at heart.
And very shortly after this interview on television, Marine Le Pen, the leader of the far right in Parliament, wrote on X that by including his budget in the catastrophic continuity of Emmanuel Macron, the Prime Minister could only fail. So here again, setting up her expectations for the vote tonight. So the question is, what happened next? Then Emmanuel Macron, coming back from a state visit to Saudi Arabia, would have to pick a new Prime Minister. But the question, who can that be? Who can be the figure to unite potentially some of these very fragmented blocs in Parliament? And again, the Parliament that remains the same until July next year. So it's a big question, a bit of a jump into the unknown here in front of what could happen next here with the government.
Thank you very much for that, Charlotte. Let's continue the conversation with Sébastien Meillard, who is a conseiller special at Institut Jacques Delors, an associate fellow at Chatham House. Sébastien, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's get into what's likely to happen. Set the scene for us. Charlotte was weighing in there, fleshing out what we know so far this week. Is it all but certain that the Barnier government will collapse?
It's what is the most dominant scenario, say over 90% scenario. There is a very, very perhaps it's more wishful thinking of both Macron and Barnier to think that the MPs would act differently. It could still, what is possible is that by 4 p.m. Paris time, by the time of the vote, if there was another new announcement from Barnier, a new concession, or something that could be a game changer, then yes, perhaps some MPs would think twice. But the way yesterday evening when Barnier went on TV, he didn't announce anything new on any new concession to the RN. He tried to address all the MPs, tried to make them think responsibly of what they were doing before entering uncharted territories. But it seems that this lack of spirit of any compromise may topple the government.
Sébastien, it feels like a lot of strings are being pulled here. Key players with master plans, or whether it's from Macron to the left coalition or to the far right and Le Pen. Politico has a story that it's been running saying, look, it's Barnier first today that she is going after, Le Pen's going after, next it will be Macron. How dangerous is this political situation for Macron's fortunes?
It's true that both Mélenchon, the far left leader, and Le Pen, the far right leader, are basically after Macron. Both of them want him to resign as quickly as possible because both of them are impatient for different reasons to have an earlier presidential election, which is supposed to be in 2027. For Mélenchon, it's best for him. He believes it's better to have it earlier if he wants to succeed. And Le Pen is in a difficult trial. She could become ineligible by the end of March, so she may also want this. But of course, this is very worrying. And I think the markets, which have until now been quite not that annoyed by the situation. I mean, of course, we saw the spread in interest rates on government bonds, but of course, if a Macron resignation was really in the air, that would get them very nervous. That's why Macron immediately yesterday put down this idea at all, and he said he would be the president of the French Republic until the very last minute of his mandate, and I think he will stick to that. There's nothing that can force him down, and the National Assembly cannot force him to do so. So they will have to stick with him.
Sébastien, may I ask you about Marine Le Pen and how she's playing this political moment now? Are you surprised about the fact that she's pulling the plug already on this Barnier government? You know, she's spent years building this kind of respectability effort and trying to build this image of a serious politician. Now the government's putting the finger at her, saying if there's chaos, it's her fault. So politically, is she playing a good hand here, or is it dangerous for her?
It's a dangerous gamble. Many believed, and many commentators, political commentators, thought that she, you pointed out, that she would be part of her image building, especially to attract more traditional right-wing voters, that she's able to govern, and the fact that she may be jumping the country into this mayhem and be actually responsible for this turmoil could damage her image. So it is a political gamble. I think Barnier really thought that she was bluffing, and that she was actually pretending and to obtain things. But it's true that she's also thinking firstly of her base, of her electors that really want Macron out, and she's trying to give a bit of bites to them. So it could damage her image. And I think that's exactly what Macron is also hoping, in a way, that of course he may have tried to find a new prime minister that can fit, but Le Pen's will not perhaps get sorted better out of this mess.
And so I guess the big question now would be, if the government falls tonight, is what next? Who can President Macron pick as prime minister potentially? There's some people talking about a technocratic government. Do you think that would be a good option, or who can be leading the government now?
So Barnier, of course, will remain as a caretaker government, head of the caretaker government for the time being. He dismissed yesterday evening the idea of being reappointed. I mean, and of course, that politically would not make any sense, although Macron could also do this, as de Gaulle had done in 1962 with Pompidou. But this time, we're stuck with this parliament until the summer, and there cannot be any new snap elections before September. So perhaps a technical government would be the safest option, because I think the MPs know also they cannot use this trick of toppling government every 2 months. So they would have to live with that, and perhaps they could be a bit more lenient with a government that will not be purely a caretaker, but that will not take major initiative, which would just take a budget, so that France can pay its civil servants, it can pay what it has to do. But for instance, to support Ukraine, to take initiative in Brussels, to be a leading economical and military power, of course, I cannot see any government now in a position to take bold initiatives. And that's also what can be worrying for partners of France in Europe.
Sébastien, you spoke to my colleagues about the here and now, and that's great. You filled our viewers in a lot. But can I take a step back and look more holistically at this? I know that President Macron has been unlucky. No one expected a global pandemic. No one expected a devastating war, the worst we've seen on this continent since 1945. And yet, during his entire tenure, he has failed to get public spending as a percentage of the broader GDP down. He has failed to get the deficit back to the kind of levels that are acceptable under accepted rules within the Growth and Stability Pact as well. Where does the blame lie for this? And I'm sure you're going to say it's a little bit of everything. But is it A, events, B, Macron and his failure as a politician and his failure to elect a government that actually could carry out the job, or 3, intransigence in the French political system?
Regarding public finance, the state of public finance, I think the blame is on him. That is, he disregarded the importance of having sound public finance. He's not a German chancellor in that sense, not at all. He believed, and still believes that the structural reforms that France he delivered on the pension reform, and dramatically did on reforming also allowance for employers and making France more attractive for foreign investors. So he did all those macroeconomic structural reforms, but on the public finance, he did not. He was too lenient. I mean, he rightly reacted during the pandemic, but then those special measures lasted much too long. And his outgoing finance minister Bruno Le Maire in a way blames his boss for having been not enough strict on those. And of course, we have the euro, which is a sort of a shield. And if France were all by itself with its own currency, we would be much more in trouble. Though he sort of used the European framework that protects France in that regard. But he believed too much on the structural reforms that would sort of forgive the rest, and the fact that the public finance are now under strains.
Sebastian, there's a lot there as well, and I take on board one of the key points you put in there. Oh my goodness me, thank God they've got the euro, because if they didn't, the French franc might be under a lot of pressure.
Thank you for listening to Squawk Box Europe Express.
For more market-moving news, you can head to cnbc.com.
Or join us again on the show with Steve Sedgwick, Karen Cho, and myself, Arabile Kumete, weekdays on CNBC.